Hello, hello, hello. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We're all joining us here on Sunday afternoon in my lovely Brooklyn apartment, ready to chat. Hello, Tim. You're the first name that I see. Glad you're joining us. What else is new, folks? Now is the time, by the way, to tweet this out, to share it, to invite other people to join the conversation, to make sure that as many of us as possible join in on what's going to be an epic, important conversation in some very, very serious times that we are having here. Now, it is April, it is Palm Sunday, and there is so much to discuss. Shout out to AST, shout out to Orga. So much to discuss. I am pouring the beverage that will not be named, even though you all know what it is. I'm pouring it. Shout out to Kazuya. Shout out to others who are joining us. So much we can talk about, so much on our minds. The world is moving very quickly. Shout out to Felicity. So much that we can discuss. I'm ready to get going. Hi, Caleb from Spain, says Harry. Well, hi to you there in Spain, Harry. Chad says, I'm finally on time to see it live. Well, glad you're joining us, Chad. Many, many things we can discuss here. Always happy to have a conversation. Shout out to Owen Stevens. So much to talk about. Glad you're with us today, Owen. I'm waiting for the what do you call it? The bubbles to continue to decrease as I pour my beverage that will not be named. So much that we can discuss. So many things on our minds today. Sitting here, it's evening time. It's lovely weather. It's starting to feel like summertime here in New York City. I'm enjoying the weather, but worried about the world. Shout out to Kinky. Welcome, Kinky. Glad you're joining us. So much we can discuss. Hi, Caleb, says J24. Hi to you as well, JT24. Wow, so much on my mind. So much to say. Where do I begin? I'm going to take the first sip of this beverage that I will not name, this beverage that is intentionally addictive, according to what I've seen in documentaries and heard discussed, this beverage that makes you more thirsty after you drink it so that you crave more of it. That was the secret to their marketing technique. It's my addiction, my vice. There we go. So, the issue that I'm going to begin speaking about is the issue that I'm sure is on everyone's mind. And that's Julian Assange, right? Julian Assange, the founder of WikiLeaks, has been removed by the police from the Ecuadorian embassy in London, and he is now in the hands of UK authorities. Meanwhile, there is now a call for him to be extradited to the United States on charges of conspiracy to commit computer intrusion, according to the indictment. This is a very, very serious situation. Now, some people look at this and they say, look, he's not charged with being a whistleblower. He's not charged with exposing all this information that was handed to him by other people. Oh, no, Julian Assange, all he's being charged for is he attempted to crack the code to the Department of Defense in coordination with Chelsea Manning way back when. That's illegal to trying to hack into the Department of Defense. This isn't an attack on civil liberties. They say, oh no, we shouldn't be concerned about it. This guy tried to hack into the Department of Defense. That's illegal. Carries up to 5 years in prison. It's a serious offense. Other people have been arrested for it. Caleb, we gotta enforce the law here. Well, you know, what's the issue? Well, here's the thing. If you believe for 1 minute that all that will happen to Julian Assange if he were to be extradited to the United States is that he would be charged for this minor offense of trying to crack a password on a Department of Defense computer, which, yes, is illegal. That's illegal activity. But if you think that that's all that's waiting for Julian Assange when he reaches the United States, you are in complete and utter delusion. We have already heard high-ranking government officials like Mike Pompeo and others declare him to be a foreign intelligence agent. They are looking to possibly detain him as an enemy combatant. His lawyers are pointing out there's a very good chance that he could be tortured. At this point, they've got Chelsea Manning, even though Chelsea Manning served her time, was pardoned, Now they've got Chelsea Manning back in federal custody to basically coerce her to testify against him if he were to be extradited to the United States. This is a very serious situation. And let's also talk about the implications of this, right? Julian Assange is not himself a leaker. Julian Assange is not a citizen of the United States. All that WikiLeaks has done is publish material that was given to them by other people. Let me emphasize this. WikiLeaks publishes material that was given to them by other people. Basically, what the New York Times and the Washington Post did during the Vietnam War, the whole Pentagon Papers case, that is what Julian Assange has done. People have leaked information to him, and he and WikiLeaks have then published that information. And if Julian Assange is to face criminal charges for publishing things that other people gave him, if that's the case, then Julian Assange basically would result in a huge level of intimidation. You know, as a journalist, you never know what your source, if what your source is telling you is classified or not. You know, and there's a good chance that you could be terrified of publishing anything because you fear that the information you're being given is classified, and then you could end up going to jail, right? That, yes, it is illegal for leakers, for people who work in the government, Department of Defense, State Department. It's illegal for them to give you classified information. That's illegal. However, it is not illegal for a journalist to publish something that happens to be classified, especially if they don't know that it's classified. Classic. Just classic stuff. So this case has huge implications. People are very nervous about what could happen next with Julian Assange. It's an intense situation. So all eyes are on what's going on there. Now, I've seen that the leader of the British Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, has supported Julian Assange and has said that he should not be extradited. That Julian Assange should not be extradited. Why? Because there's a good chance that he could be extradited to the United States and then be tortured, because this is an attack on freedom of the press. This is the U.S. government, the deep state, cracking down on those who would expose their secrets. Now, someone else is pointing out Chelsea Manning's sentence was commuted. She was not pardoned. Very good point, Grant. You are correct. It was not a pardon. Technical confusion there. But yes, this is a very serious situation and a very serious case. So all eyes are on Julian Assange. We all fear what could happen next. I'm glad to see Jeremy Corbyn speaking up about the case. I'm glad to see Tulsi Gabbard, Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard, speaking up about the case. This puts freedom of the press and the ability of people in the Western world to publish information into a great deal of danger. Could you imagine if before you published anything, you had to call up the Department of Defense and say, this isn't classified, is it? Am I allowed to publish this? Scary times that we're living in. Scary, scary times. So we should all be concerned. We should all be worried. We should all be thinking about Julian Assange and WikiLeaks and the situation there. It's a very serious situation. And someone pointed out, that yes, we've got Jeremy Corbyn speaking up for Julian Assange, but on the other hand, we've got Bernie Sanders not speaking up for Julian Assange. Well, this is a big moment. You can learn a lot about a public figure by where they stand on this issue. I kid you not. Take a look, right? Who is speaking up on Julian Assange's behalf and who is not? You can learn a lot, right? So, Mike Gravel, Sal North is pointing out, has also spoken up on behalf of Julian Assange. Glad to hear that. I remember when Mike Gravel was running for president in 2008, and, he had the reputation of being kind of a quirky old man, but he talked about the military-industrial complex. He talked about war. I enjoyed it. And I will say I particularly enjoyed, at one point, one of the Democratic debates back in 2008. They asked Mike Gravel, and they asked everyone, all the candidates, they said, now you all say you want to get off of fossil fuels. Do you remember, did any of you here not come in a private jet? And only one man at that debate raised his hand and said he did not come in a private jet, and that was Mike Gravel. And so they said, Mike Gravel, how did you come to this debate? He said, I took a train and a bus, and maybe next time one of these guys will give me a ride. I thought that was a very classic moment. But Mike Gravel, let's not forget that he was a senator, a U.S. senator from Alaska, way long time ago, 1970. And he read the Pentagon Papers into the congressional record. That was his claim to fame. During that whole, escapade, that whole fiasco, 1968 to 1972, when there was a big crisis in U.S. society, Mike Gravel was a member of the U.S. Congress, of the U.S. Senate, and he was on the side of those that were opposing the Vietnam War, and he read into the congressional record the Pentagon Papers, showing that huge amounts of deception had been carried out by U.S. leaders in order to justify the Vietnam War. That's Mike Gravel's background. I think he's an interesting guy. I'm hoping that maybe later, a friend of mine, the same friend who I had the chat with regarding Andrew Yang, I'm hoping that we'll have a chance to sit down and chat about Mike Gravel. Because he is certainly an interesting candidate. I know, just like me, he actually has visited the Islamic Republic of Iran. I know he appeared on Press TV from the studio, something that I also did at one point. I know Mike Gravel has been outspoken in being an advocate for the One Belt, One Road initiative coming out of China. So just like I think Mike Gravel is an interesting candidate, I also think that Tulsi Gabbard is an interesting candidate. I think that Bernie Sanders is an interesting candidate. I think that Andrew Yang is an interesting candidate. I don't agree with there are certainly things about each of those candidates that I don't agree with. There are certainly things about each of those candidates that I do agree with. I'm not taking sides here. I'm not shilling for one candidate or other. I will say that this Democratic primary that is taking place in the lead up to the 2020 election is looking to be quite interesting, right? Because the Democrats announced, oh my goodness, in response to the whole fiasco with Bernie feeling it was robbed from him and all that, we've changed the rules. We have changed the rules. No more superdelegates. Well, that was smoke and mirrors. There are no more superdelegates on the first ballot. On the first ballot. But if no candidate can get a clear majority vote at the convention on the first ballot, which rarely happens, if that takes place, well, then, lo and behold, then all of a sudden the superdelegates are back in the game. So the superdelegates have not gone away. So it's still looking to be an interesting convention. Right now, Bernie Sanders is the front-runner, according to most polls, with 32%. We've got Joe Biden, who I'm going to talk about later. And then we've got Pete Buttigieg. Pete Buttigieg, the mayor of South Bend, Indiana, right? South Bend, Indiana, such a big metropolis. Running South Bend, Indiana is just like running the entire United States, isn't it? That's what I think. I'm just kidding, right? Pete Buttigieg, right? He is the mayor of a town in Indiana. He is gay. He fought in Afghanistan. He was on the Ellen DeGeneres show, and we should all love him because, why? Because he seems really nice. He has a really nice smile, and yeah, we all should fall in love with him because he's a centrist and he's not like Bernie Sanders. Yeah, the Democratic primary is looking to be interesting. 18 different candidates at this point. 18 different candidates. It's going to be a hoopla. It's going to be a bit of a circus. But we shall see what happens. Now, I just want to take a look at one thing here. Okay. Just checking where we're at technically. I don't know, is it Buttigieg or Buttigieg? I remember I thought it was one, and then I couldn't remember which one it was. But a lot to talk about. But I want to, step out of the United States for just a moment. Libya. Has anyone noticed what's happening in Libya? Right? At this point, we've got one faction trying to seize power from the other. The country's on the brink of a civil war. Right? In addition to the fact that there is human chattel slavery now in Libya, in addition to the fact you've got terrorist groups operating in Libya, such as the ISIL terrorists, such as the Al-Qaeda terrorists. In addition to that, now the country's on the brink of civil war, and we understand that Saudi Arabia is backing one of the factions. Now, I hate to be repetitive, but it needs to be said. Compare Libya prior to 2011, prior to the revolution, to today. There is no question that Libyans were living far, far better when the Islamic Socialist government was in power, when Colonel Muammar Gaddafi was presiding over a country that at that point had the highest life expectancy on the African continent, universal literacy, universal housing. They had built at that point the great man-made river, the biggest irrigation system in the entire world, just a huge infrastructure project. People's living standards had just drastically risen since the 1968-69 revolution, and we were sold a bill of goods in the media that Gaddafi is a dictator and that the people are rising up. It's a glorious revolution brought to you by CNN, brought to you by George Soros, brought to you by Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook. And lo and behold, NATO bombs, mass destruction, and now Libya is supposed to be a free country. They have joined the free world, just like Iraq after the toppling and the invasion, removing the Iraqi Ba'ath Socialist government, just like Syria is aiming, they want us to do in Syria. What is the result of these regime change operations? We're told that it's a humanitarian operation. We have to rescue those poor people who are suffering under the evil dictator. Look at Libya today. Would anyone in their right mind say that the people of Libya are better off without Gaddafi? There's no argument that can be made there. The same for Iraq, the same for Afghanistan, as bad as the Taliban was. It's been 16 years. Nowhere can you say that these humanitarian interventions, these war on terror interventions, operations, make life better for the people? They just don't do that, right? And the conditions for the people overwhelmingly get worse, and that's the reality. And thanks to Julian Assange, we have the emails of Hillary Clinton where they show you the ugly inside of these operations and how they meticulously plan to destroy countries. There's even an email from Hillary Clinton where she talked about how a Sunni-Shia war throughout the Middle East might be to the benefit of Israel and to the United States. That it might be good to have a big war between the Sunni and the Shia throughout the Middle East. That's in an email. You want to talk about evil, right? Trying to foment a religious sectarian war is something that Israel and U.S. leaders apparently think might be good for them, right? Thanks to Julian Assange, that information is public, and now they want to punish Julian Assange for letting us see the ugly insides of how they operate. But so much to talk about, so much that we can go over. I wanted to mention another oil-rich country in that region, and that would be Saudi Arabia. Now, the Wall Street Journal this week gives the front page, this is the weekend review, to the Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman. Gives him center attention. And the reality is that Saudi Arabia is in a society-wide crisis at this point, mainly because of hydraulic fracking. Saudi Arabia's entire existence as a country is about selling oil, right? The British Empire, British bankers discovered the House of Saud as a useful ally with their Wahhabi ideology and propped them up and backed them. And, we know about the Sykes-Picot Agreement, which carved up the Middle East, and that the House of Saud was basically set up and appointed by the British and by the Americans as the de facto rulers of the Arabian Peninsula for economic reasons, because they presided over the oil. In 1938, we have the first oil coming out of the Arabian Peninsula, and lo and behold, after the Second World War, the USA, and it acknowledges Saudi Arabia, starts selling them huge amounts of weapons, they sell us huge amounts of oil, and that's how you get the House of Saud. They are a middleman for Wall Street, and the way that they maintain their stable operation as a middleman is with a brutal autocratic government, a Wahhabi state. They're the religious advisor to the Wahhabi family was this bin Wahhab individual, this is the religious advisor to the Saudi royal family early on. Was a what you could call a Salafi, an extremist Sunni, and they've set up a country based on this very, very extreme teaching, interpretation of the Sunni branch of Islam, right? They talk about, Salafism, the kind of people who eat with three fingers because they believe that the Prophet Muhammad ate with three fingers, a country where they have the death penalty and use it very, very liberally. People are executed for crimes like sorcery, for crimes like insulting the king. Just a very brutal autocracy, in which a very, very wealthy royal family gets rich, in which there are guest worker slaves. From what I understand, 33%, or at least 30% of the population living in Saudi Arabia are not citizens or subjects. They don't have subjects. They don't have citizens. They have subjects. And that they have these guest worker slaves from all over the world, from places like the Philippines, from Bangladesh, from North Africa, and these people have absolutely no rights, and they get executed and tortured all the time, and they just disappear, and they're basically trapped. They can't leave the country. It's just a horrendous. Saudi Arabia is a pretty horrendous place. It is a giant Wall Street oil plantation. And it is a country that exists for the purpose of facilitating control over a huge amount of oil deposits for Wall Street and London, right? BP, ExxonMobil, Chevron, they basically utilize Saudi Arabia as their middleman. And the Pentagon makes loads of money selling them weapons. We buy the oil from them, they buy the weapons from us, and it's this huge financial relationship. Shout out to Ramiro, who's joining us. That's the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. It's a pretty awful thing. It is a pretty abominable reality. It's something we should all be horrified by, be outraged about. It's not a good thing. Not a good thing at all. But that's the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Just an awful thing. But the Saudis were able to maintain their rule, maintain their importance, because they had the oil. But now, something has come along which is threatening to completely derail that whole setup with Saudi Arabia. That entire setup, where Saudi Arabia exists as the middleman for Western oil companies. It runs this autocratic state on the Arabian Peninsula. It makes lots of money selling oil. It buys lots of weapons from the United States, fourth largest military budget in the entire world. Well, lo and behold, that whole relationship is now in question. And you can bet this crown prince is aware of that. And that's why things in Saudi Arabia are getting weird. And the reason for that is because of hydraulic fracking. Fracking. Chevron deal bets big on shale. All right? Fracking. Now in the United States, we have discovered that we have huge amounts of oil in the shale, below the ground, and that by, pumping boiling gas beneath the ground, we can break up oil deposits from the shale gas. And lo and behold, we have huge amounts of oil domestically, more than we ever thought we had. We used to think we had oil in Texas and in Louisiana. Lo and behold, we got oil in Ohio, we got oil in Pennsylvania, we got oil in Michigan, we got oil in Montana. Below the surface, in the shale, in the United States, we have got loads of oil, we've got loads of natural gas that we didn't have access to before. But the capitalists developed the means of production in order to advance their profits. They discovered a mechanism for extracting oil from the shale. And lo and behold, Saudi Arabia is not as important to Wall Street and London in maintaining their control of global markets as it once was. Controlling Middle Eastern oil ultimately is not as important as it once was. Why? We've got plenty of oil here in the United States. Saudi Arabia is not as important as it once was, right? We know about the OPEC boycott in the 70s, how, there were gasoline, people waiting for hours for gasoline, huge fuel shortages. It was a disaster. If there was to be an OPEC boycott today, all we would do is start purchasing all the shale oil. And in fact, at this point, they have lifted A couple years ago, they lifted the 1973 oil export ban. And so at this point, the USA is selling oil, right? We are selling oil to China. We are selling oil to Canada. We are selling oil around the world. For years, the Democrats pushed this line that if we just had energy independence, we didn't need Middle Eastern oil, there would be peace in the Middle East. Lo and behold, we have energy independence. Hydraulic fracking, which Two's Time is pointing out is a natural environmental disaster, totally is. I'm not for it. But hydraulic fracking has made it so we are no longer dependent on Middle Eastern oil. But the wars continue. Why? Because it is not about the oil itself. It's not about access to the oil itself. It's about controlling global markets. Right? It's about maintaining a monopoly, not having competitors. These countries that the United States has gone after. Libya, huge oil exporting country competing with Wall Street on the international markets. Iraq, huge oil exporting country competing with Wall Street on the international markets. Venezuela, huge oil producing country competing with Wall Street on the international markets. Russia, huge oil exporting country competing with Wall Street on the international markets, not just in terms of oil, but also in terms of natural gas. Right? We are at the point that Wall Street and London very much want to control the oil markets internationally, and they don't want any competitors to emerge. But at this point, we're producing so much oil domestically that these vassal states around the world, like not just Saudi Arabia, they're the biggest one, but you got Kuwait, you got Oman, you got Qatar, these autocratic regimes in the Middle East where some kind of king or royal family or sultan or sheikh sits on top of a country where people are very, very poor, but there's lots of oil. This setup, the United Arab Emirates, thank you, Vito, this setup is not as important as it once was, right? We're not dependent on these vassal states. We would like to, I shouldn't say we, Wall Street and London, the de facto rulers of the United States behind the scenes, would like to maintain control of the international markets, but these countries, the idea that they have to pander to them, it's very similar to what happened in the 70s, where there was what you might call a demolition of the U.S.-aligned kind of nationalist governments that had sprung up during the Cold War, right? Where after the coup in Chile, they demolished the domestic economy of Chile. Where after the coup in Argentina in the early 80s, they just demolished the domestic economy there. We have allowed Saudi Arabia, for strategic reasons to acquire vast amounts of wealth. We don't, Wall Street and London doesn't basically need them to do that any longer. That's the situation that we're in. And Saudi Arabia realizes it no longer has the value to the West that it once has. So now, the question is, at this point, will they be able to regain militarily what they do not have economically? Maybe the West is not economically dependent on them any longer, but maybe they can become so important as a military operation with their sending of weapons to Syria, with their sending of weapons to Libya, with their operations in Yemen. If they can be seen as a military state, as an enforcer of Wall Street's will, spreading weapons and death and destruction throughout the region and making sure that the competitors of Wall Street, like Iran, are suppressed. If they can become a military vassal state, a militarily valuable state to Wall Street, perhaps they can regain their value because they no longer have the value they once had in terms of economics, right? But perhaps they'll have military value. That's what's going on. Saudi Arabia is in transition as a country. Bahrain is another state, says Vito. Absolutely right. Saudi Arabia is in crisis, but at this point, the entire oil-based global order is in crisis. At this point, China is pioneering and moving ahead with new energy vehicles and fusion energy and artificial intelligence. And China is desperate to get the world off the oil-based economy. Why? Because China is dependent on importing of oil. If oil in China were to be cut off, the lights would go off on the Chinese mainland, right? They need oil. They desperately need oil, and their dependency on oil has risen. They need more and more oil as their living standard goes up, as their economy expands, as their apparatus of production on the mainland goes up. They need more oil, not less. And so China China very much sees this as a weakness that they have, their dependence on oil imports. So in China, they're pushing, new energy vehicles, electric cars like crazy. And furthermore, China is working very, very hard. They have to secure that South China Sea because it's at the ports of Shanghai that the oil tankers arrive. Those oil tankers, they come in to the ports of Shanghai, and that's where China gets its oil imports, that they can keep their huge apparatus of production, raising people out of poverty every single day, building, constructing, making huge breakthroughs in scientific research, all the amazing things happening in China as they just raise the country up, as they continue to move ahead with poverty alleviation, with their One Belt, One Road initiative, with the China-Pakistan economic corridor, as they move ahead with that, as they continue to move ahead with all that they are doing in China, this huge, step forward in terms of raising people out of poverty, in terms of science, in terms of everything that China is doing, they need oil to do it. And the South China Sea is where that oil comes from. And it's very, very important. There are some pipelines connected to Russia, but not much, right? If China is going to keep getting oil, it needs the South China Sea to be safe. And that's why the USA is increasing its presence in the South China Sea and in the Asian areas. We talked about the Asian pivot under Obama and the pouring in of U.S. military forces into the Asian and Pacific theater. And the reason for that, the specific reason for that, was to basically put a threat onto China. And we know that China has been in Nicaragua, working with the Sandinista socialist government to build a new canal that would counter the Panama Canal. All right? And why are they doing that? Because it's understood that in a time of crisis, the United States could call up their puppet government in Panama, they could move their military forces in there, and they could close the Panama Canal, which is very, very vital in terms of maritime transport. So, if China has a sympathetic government in Nicaragua that will allow them to build a canal through Nicaragua, then there would be an alternative to the Panama Canal. And that would be very, very exciting. At that point, China would not be afraid. So China is looking to secure the South China Sea. China is looking to build a canal through Nicaragua for their own reasons, right? For reasons of building up their economy. But at the end of the day, this is very, very good for the global economy. Why? Wall Street and the oil bankers, they are thriving on holding back human progress. They need to keep us on this 18th century mode of production of oil-centered economy, number one. Number two, they want to keep countries around the world poor so that they're not competitors, so that they're dependent. They want the whole world to be poor and dependent on the West. They want a monopoly. They want the entire world buying everything from Western countries. Meanwhile, now because of technology, it used to be that in this global setup where the West maintained a monopoly and kept the developing world in poverty, it used to be that at home they had what you might call the aristocracy of labor. High-paid industrial workers, factory workers, who, were loyal to the homeland. They worked in their factory. They got paid well to manufacture the steel and the tanks and the whatever to make this system work. But now, because of artificial intelligence, we are seeing the elimination of the aristocracy of labor. The need for an industrial working class is gradually fading away. They don't need workers at the assembly line any longer. And as a result, the living standard of people in the Western countries is decreasing because they don't need at home an aristocracy of labor, a class of well-paid, middle-class, comfortable factory workers, industrial workers at home. They don't need it anymore. There is no need for millions of Americans to live a comfortable life working the assembly line, right? The steel mills, the coal mines, all of that, they're gradually looking to eliminate all of that. Anything that can be done, by a machine, pretty soon it will be a machine. It will be done by a machine. And the only thing that human beings will have left is our humanity. Jack Ma, the tech billionaire in China, talks a lot about this, right? For years, the entire educational system, the way we bring up children, has all been about getting people to work more like machines. Getting people to function less like human beings and more like machines. But now, anything that requires machine-like behavior is going to be done by a machine. We've got machines that can play chess better than humans can. We've got machines that can bookkeep better than humans can. We've got machines that can invest stocks better than humans can. So if it requires a machine-like mentality, A machine heart with a machine mind, right? That's Charlie Chaplin. But anything that requires machine-like functioning can be done by a machine. And so the entire way that we bring up children, the entire way we've trained the mind to operate, that entire method of operating in the world, we're at the point, lo and behold, we're going to have to rethink all of that. We're going to have to rethink the relationship of human beings. For a long time, human beings functioned, as Karl Marx called them in his book Capital, basically as appendages to machines. That's in Karl Marx's Capital. He talks about how the worker is an appendage to a machine. Well, now we are at the point where machines do not need human appendages any longer. The proletariat as a class is being eliminated. They don't need industrial workers anymore. Workers no longer play a role in production. And so you're going to have millions of people who are outcast and starving. Millions of people who have no place in the global assembly line. And that is going to totally change everything. We are on the brink of a great social revolution. Right? First, there is an economic revolution. Next, there is a social revolution. And third, there is a political revolution. And we are in the early stages of a economic revolution, where a new mode of production without workers, without factory workers, without workers involved in production, machines without appendages, is moving in to take over. This is the end game of what Marx described in Capital, as workers compete with machines, as capitalists constantly drive to make the means of production more efficient, to reduce the role of labor, to make the worker more easily replaceable, to pay the worker less and less, to involve the worker less and less, and at the same time to churn out more and more and more products than ever before, to fill the market with more and more products than ever before, more cheaply produced, and then to face the great catastrophe that results from that. Lo and behold, as you eliminate labor, as you drive the value of the worker down, the worker is also the consumer. And the consumer can never buy back the product that he has driven so hard to produce. And as you cast out millions of workers from the means of production, the ability to buy these huge numbers of products, of iPhones, of iPads, of shoes, of smartphones, of antennas, of books, of socks, of shirts, the ability of workers to buy decreases. And you have a huge glut of overproduction. Right? Now, people will think back to the financial crisis of 2008. And what do they tell you about the financial crisis of 2008? The housing bubble burst. Remember that? The housing bubble burst. People, all of a sudden, were getting their homes foreclosed on because they couldn't afford to pay back the loans they had used to buy their houses. That's what happened. The housing bubble burst. And if you're a liberal, you then blame that on Alan Greenspan. Alan Greenspan legalized all kinds of lending that had previously been illegal, so people who couldn't, got these predatory loans, and they couldn't afford to buy back, to pay them off, and they lost their homes. That's the liberal narrative. The right-wing narrative is, the government has these anti-discrimination laws, and they forced companies to lend money to poor people who couldn't afford it. It was awful. Well, they're both wrong. The housing bubble burst for this reason. Americans couldn't afford to buy homes anymore. The standard of living of people in the United States has gone down so significantly, has been going down significantly. Wages have been decreasing, right? The rate of debt has been increasing. The overall living standards, people's savings have been decreasing. The Americans, throughout the Bush years, just continued to see this steady decline in their standard of living. And so Alan Greenspan was sitting there in the Federal Reserve trying to figure out how he could keep Americans spending. And he legalized all kinds of credit card lending that had previously been illegal. And he legalized mortgage lending practices that had also previously been illegal. Why? Was it because, it was... No, the reason he did it was very simple. He needed Americans to keep buying houses. Think about how much of the U.S. economy involves new houses being constructed and people buying them, right? You've got the lumber industry, you got the steel industry, you got construction workers, you got lawn care. I mean, it is huge, right? If you think of all the money that is involved in people buying houses and new houses being constructed, houses being remodeled, houses being built, that's huge. And so, in order to keep the U.S. economy moving ahead, Alan Greenspan had to keep Americans buying houses. But Americans couldn't afford to keep buying houses. So, Alan Greenspan made it legal for them to get loans so they could keep buying houses even when they couldn't afford them. And that, lo and behold, it worked out for a little while, right? For a while it worked out. And then pretty soon, though, when these people don't pay back the loans that they get, then you get banks that fall and collapse and fail. That's what happened. And then you had the Obama administration come in with Dodd-Frank and try to impose some of those regulations once again. But now we've got the Trump administration coming in and ripping up regulations and cutting regulations and decreasing regulations. And lo and behold, people are getting, people are getting loans and it's happening again. And, people talk about there's another bubble that's waiting to burst, and that's the student debt bubble, right? Again, Americans, in order to go to college, young people are getting loans to go to college. However, their ability to get a good-paying job when they get out of college, a job that'll enable them to pay back that loan, not exactly what it once was. So yes, if your young person goes to college, they graduate, and then they end up working at Starbucks with their degree in philosophy or political science or, astronomy or geography or whatever, if they end up then working at Starbucks, lo and behold, they're not going to be able to pay back the $100,000, and they're going to start defaulting. And then those banks that put up that money are not going to get the money. And pretty soon, you're going to have a debt bubble burst. And let me add, the student loan market is particularly interesting because you can never declare bankruptcy on a student loan. Never, right? You get a student loan, it will hang over your head for the rest of your life. It never goes away, right? Can't go away. So, add to that, now, all these millennials, all these, young people with these big student loans now, lo and behold, they're going to have to go and buy a home at some point, right? Wife and kids go and buy a home. Do you think you can buy a home? You think you can get a mortgage to buy a home if you owe hundreds of thousands of dollars in student debt? If you owe tens of thousands of dollars in student debt, do you think you can go buy a home? No. No, you cannot. No, you cannot. So, I think that housing bubble might burst once again. We've got a lot hanging over our heads. The U.S. economy at this point is based on debt. All the growth we are seeing is debt-based economic growth. The rate of household debt in the United States is the highest it has ever been and has continued to rise. Trump says the economy is going up. It is. Spending is somewhat increasing, but it's all based on debt. Actual income is not increasing. Actual living standards is not increasing. Wages are barely going up. They've gone up just a tiny amount. The U.S. public is getting poorer and poorer and poorer. That's the problem here. And they're getting poorer because of the problem of overproduction, of the fact that the reason you had that post-war American dream, that white picket fence and that nice house and all of that, the reason you had that was because at that point, imperialism, the global system of monopoly capitalism, needed a strata of well-paid industrial workers in the homeland. And at this point, they don't need that anymore. They don't need you at the steel mill. They don't need you in the coal mine. They don't need you in the auto plant. They don't need you. They don't need you in the global apparatus of production at this point. They don't need you, right? They've got artificial intelligence that can do it. It's not just offshoring. Offshoring is a minor factor. I mean, it's a factor, sure, when they ship jobs overseas, but the biggest factor is automation. They don't need you in the means of production anymore. They don't need you as an appendage to a machine. And because of that, they don't need to let you have the lifestyle that they once gave you. They don't need you to have the living standards that you once had. That's the issue, right? They are eliminating the labor aristocracy because they don't need it anymore. The standard of living is going down, and as a result, we all can't afford to buy houses. We can't afford to pay for college. We can't afford to do all these things that we once were able to do. And the bosses want us to keep spending, but they don't want to pay us the money. That's what's going on here. The rulers of the United States, the billionaires and bankers that run the United States, they want us all to keep spending money, but they don't want to pay us for doing it, right? They don't want to pay us for our labor. They want to remove us from the apparatus of production. They want to eliminate jobs, but at the same time, they want us to keep buying, and you can't have it both ways. People with money spend money. People without money can't spend money. And the more you invent ways for people without money to spend money, it only works for a little while longer, right? Thomas Jefferson very famously said, "Do not spend money that you do not have." Well, Thomas Jefferson, his advice has not been followed by the U.S. government in about 100 years. The U.S. government is spending lots of money it doesn't have. The U.S. public is being constantly pushed to spend money it does not have. We're at the point, there was a survey that the overwhelming majority of Americans could not afford a $400 emergency. $400 emergency. When you have a public that cannot afford a $400 emergency, they don't have $400 in the bank, they don't have $400 they can call up a relative and say, "I'm desperate, I need $400, I'll get it back to you." The overwhelming majority of the U.S. public cannot afford a $400 emergency. How in the world can you say that we have a booming economy, right? Well, GDP is rising, we're headed for another crisis of overproduction because the problems are systemic. And I do apologize. Kinky says I'm sounding pretty bleak. I'm not trying to be bleak here. I'm telling you that there is a necessity that we get beyond the capitalist mode of production. When you have production for profits, not for rational use, not for sane reasons, when the economy is functioning only to make a profit for a few, it's going to be functioning in an erratic, irrational way that's going to result in cyclical crises of overproduction. John Maynard Keynes didn't want to be a Marxist, so he called it underconsumption. But this is the reality that we're living in. This is the Götterdämmerung, the end game of what Marx predicted in his book Capital. That's what we're living in right now. And you'll notice that Russia and China continue to rise. And why do they rise? Because their economy is controlled by the state, not profit. The state controls the apparatus of production. There are central planners, and the central planners tell the private sector and the public sector what to do. And so as a result, the economies can continue to grow because they're not operating on the basis of the irrational profit motive. And that's the difference. When you have an economy based on profits, you're going to have a mess. But when you have a government of action that controls the centers of economic power and ensures that things get produced, when you have that, overall, at that point, you can continue to see growth. That in order to ensure the continued economic growth, you need a rationally planned economy. The private sector and the public sector must be controlled by society. The means of production, the major centers of economic power, must operate on the basis of public good, not profits. The state must control the means of production. Society as a whole must control the major centers of economic power. The economy must function according to rational reason and central planning, not the profit interests of a wealthy few. That's socialism, right? And you can say, well, that's not the utopia that I want, Caleb. I want this glorious, beautiful thing. I do too, right? We all want the best possible world. But I'm telling you that the difference between capitalism and socialism is that in capitalism, profits are in command. In capitalism, you don't have houses because people need to live in them. You have houses so landlords and bankers can make money off of them. You don't have food so people can eat it. You have food so that agribusiness and big box stores and all kinds of people can make money off of it. Capitalism is a system in which production and all economic activity is carried out for the purpose of making profits for a small group of owners. Socialism is a system in which the state and society at large dictate production based on rational central planning and interests. That's the difference between capitalism and socialism. And right now, socialism is continuing to rise, and capitalism is getting more and more irrational because the computer revolution is throwing a monkey wrench in the works of capitalism like you wouldn't believe. Capitalism works because you have these people called workers, and they go to their factory, and they're paid by their boss to participate in production, and at the end of the day, they get their paycheck, and they go and they buy some of the products that they and other workers produce. And it always has, problems, cyclical crises. They can never fully buy back everything they produce, or else their boss wouldn't make a profit, right? But at the end of the day, aside from the boom-bust cycle, as long as you've got factory workers, you can make the capitalist system function for the most part. Well, now, you've got capitalism, you've got the means of production privately operating to make profits for a small group of owners without any workers. That's what we've got right now. Marx never predicted this in Capital. He talked about, the increasing poverty of the workers. He never predicted capitalism without workers. That's what we have now. We have capitalism without the proletariat. We've got capitalist production without workers. That's what they're moving toward. And you can't do it because somebody has to buy the products. Because the overwhelming majority of humanity are not capitalists. And if they're not capitalists, they have to be workers. And if they're not workers, where do they fit into this economy? And if they don't fit into this economy, how can they survive? And that's why you've got John Podesta talking, lo and behold, about overpopulation. Overpopulate. There are too many people in the world. Oh my God, there's just too many people in the world. That's what they're saying. And as far as they're concerned, yeah, there are too many people, right? They don't want to spend all the money to take care of all these people, and they can't make a profit off of exploiting their labor anymore. They don't need them any longer. That's the situation we're in. So just like Robert Thomas Malthus and the old feudal order thought that at the time of the French Revolution, look, there's just too many people, right? The French, they were just breeding like crazy, and there's all these extra people, so of course you had a revolution. Can't be the old feudal system, can't be the way things were set up. Oh no, there's just too many of those poor French peasants, and they're pouring into the cities. There you go. The obsession by Bill Gates and Silicon Valley with overpopulation is based on a realization that they are moving toward a workerless economy. That's what that's about. That's why they are obsessing with overpopulation. Because they know they don't have room for workers at the assembly line anymore. There are going to be millions of people that are expendable. And as artificial intelligence takes off, every day more and more people are becoming expendable and useless, right? To a capitalist, you are a number. They look at you and they see a financial calculation. How much money can I make off of this person? That's what they see. How much money can I make off of this person? And for millions of people in the world, that number is going to be zero pretty soon. And when that number is zero, they have no interest in maintaining your existence. The talk of overpopulation, the talk of eugenics, which is, they always accuse, there's the synthetic, pseudo-left. You're right, they're muddled in this, but it's coming out of, I would say the alt-right forces talk about it more than anybody else, right? I mean, the Richard Spencer types are always talking about eugenics and superior races and breeding people and all of that. It's everywhere, and it's being filtered into the political establishment. On the pseudo-left, they're saying, the problem is there's too many people in the world, and we all ought to be poorer, and poverty is great because you're not hurting the environment. On the right, the alt-right wing, they're talking about these useless people with inferior intelligence and race science and all this, and the bell curve and all of that. Lo and behold, right, they're talking their way out of the crisis, the capitalist way out of the crisis. The capitalist attempts to liquidate the crisis, as William Z. Foster talks about in his 1932 book describing the Great Depression in the United States. The capitalist attempts to liquidate the crisis are mass destruction and death. They need basically to eliminate those that they have no way of making profits from. That's what they're thinking about. And this concept, there's all this talk of fascism right now, and I hate to be repetitive, but you need to know this. The basis of fascism, the basis of genocide, the basis of mass murder is the belief that you can't have growth. That's the basis. If you believe that the pie is only this big, right? The pie is only this big, right? The pie can only be this big. The pie cannot get any bigger. It can get smaller, but it can't get bigger. The pie is only this big. If the pie is only a certain size, the only way that you can increase your slice of the pie is by cutting into somebody else's slice of the pie, right? Because the pie is only this big. If you believe the pie is only this big, it never gets any bigger, the only way that you can get a bigger slice of the pie is by cutting into the slice of someone else. And everyone wants a bigger slice of the pie. This is human beings. We want to make a better life for our kids. We want our kids to be better off than we are. We want a better life. We want things in our life to improve, right? You know, you get to a certain point in your life, you want more than what you had before. That's just natural. But if the pie is only this big, can't get any bigger, in a no-growth situation, the only way that you can get a bigger slice of the pie for yourself is by cutting into the slice of the pie of somebody else. And they're setting it up, right? One group of people says, you know what? I want a bigger slice of the pie, and this group over here, this other race, this other nationality, this other region, this other religion, they need to have a smaller slice of the pie because they don't work as hard as I do, or they're inferior to me, or whatever. And so they're set up, and they're going to, one section of society starts to say that they want to cut into what the other section says. And the other section says, no, actually, I should have a bigger slice of the pie. I should have a bigger slice of the pie. So then they want to cut into the other section. They talk about whipsawing, right? The old whipsaw, right? Just cut a log with two guys, and when one guy's pushing, the other guy's pulling. And when the other guy's pulling, the other guy's pushing. Zzz, 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 zzz. That's what the capitalists do in a time of crisis. They whipsaw the population. Zzz, zzz, zzz. Pull from one, give to the other. Pull from one, give to the other. Push, pull, push, pull. One section of society beating down and terrorizing another section of society. That's what they envision right now. That's their way out of the crisis. Reduction of the population, reduction of living standards, and different constituencies, different regions, different nationalities, different religions, different backgrounds, different political groupings, different constituencies, different races, different religions, all fighting against each other, demanding that they be the ones who don't take the cut and the other guy take the cut. But the way out is growth. The way out is saying, no, we need the banks, factories, and industries, the major centers of economic power, to operate in a rational way so that the pie can expand. Right? That's the way out. When the understanding is that the pie can expand, the pie can get bigger, then you can get a bigger slice for yourself without cutting into somebody else. When you can have a centrally planned economy, when the banks, factories, and industries, when the centers of economic power function in a rational way, right? At that point, you don't need different sections of society beating each other down. You don't need one section of society beating down another section of society, all competing. My slice should be bigger. No, your slice should be bigger. No. At that point, when the economy is functioning in a rational way and growth is unlimited and the pie keeps getting bigger, you can have social peace. Now, somebody asked about the Uyghurs, right? Well, I want to point out, I wrote an article a couple years ago about, basically how China has operated in Tibet and in the Uyghur regions, and why they have vastly reduced the amount of violence that went on there, right? In a long time in Tibet, occasionally you'd have anti-Han Chinese riots where people would be beaten up on the basis of being Han Chinese. In the Uyghur regions, they had the knife attacks where these Wahhabi Islamo extremists or whatever would take out knives and go on trains and cut people up. That hasn't been happening. And the reason that China has been effective in reducing the amount of violence in the Uyghur regions and reducing the amount of violence in Tibet has been by building up these regions. Poverty alleviation. The cure for terrorism in Tibet is poverty alleviation, right? They go into these parts of Tibet where people were still living in shacks without running water and electricity. They give them modern housing with running water and electricity. They build huge, the Tibet Skyway. They give them access. Chinese government has built traditional Tibetan monasteries. They have found traditional Tibetans who maintain their religion, and they've said, you know what? As long as you're not hostile to communism, you don't have to be a dialectical materialist communist. If you want to believe in traditional Tibetan Buddhism, the Chinese government at this point is building monasteries, right? And facilitating tourism, right? Because there's Tibetan, Buddhist, stuff all over the world. More than ever before, tourists from around the world are coming into Tibet, a historically poor region, and spending money, right? Tibet is having a vast economic boom right now, and as a result, as people see their standard of living going up, they don't engage in violence, right? So the Tibet rioting stuff, all of that stuff, Ancient history, right? That the 50s Civil War. Now at this point, Tibetans are more pro-Chinese communist than they've ever been because the Chinese government is funding their traditional religion. The Chinese government is raising up their standard of living, giving people housing, giving people electricity, building, huge highways and trainways to connect them to the other parts of the world, facilitating tourism, tourists to come in and learn about their traditional religion. And the same with the Uyghur region, right? China has vastly alleviated poverty throughout the Uyghur region, built infrastructure. They're finding, they're finding Muslim imams who are not in favor of terrorism, who favor cooperation with the Chinese Communist Party, and they're building monasteries and seminaries for them, and they are funding, they're bringing money into the Uyghur regions, and lo and behold, there hasn't been quite a bit of violence lately, right? That when you respond to unrest by giving people stability, by raising the standard of living, people tend to be pacified. People become violent and separatist and terroristic, and they do all of that based on conditions of hostility. But when things become more stable, right? When living conditions are going up, people are less likely to be involved in terrorism. They're less likely to be involved in drug trafficking and drug cartels. If you create a stable above-ground economy, the underground economy starts to fade away. The underground economy emerges when there is not an above-ground economy, right? That's why, for example, when the USA demolished the economy of Chile following the 1973 coup, you saw a huge rise in child prostitution and drug trafficking in Chile because the actual economy was destroyed, and as a result, the underground economy emerged. People have to survive. That's why the crack epidemic in urban areas in the United States followed deindustrialization. As the factories left the urban centers of the United States, the crack epidemic and cocaine dealing and drug dealing replaced it. You get rid of the good-paying jobs people can get and not risk going to prison. People will get another good-paying job that's a lot riskier, right? It's very, very simple, right? That instability, that poverty, crime, terrorism, these things are the result of instability. Now, you always say, well, people can make a choice. And you're right. People can make a choice. However, people tend to make different choices based on the circumstances that they're in, right? And you can point to some person that they're in a really bad situation and they made the right choice the whole time, didn't do the wrong thing. Good for them. They deserve a medal, and you're right. You're right. Morally, people have the ability. But people tend to make good moral choices when it's a lot easier to do so, and people tend people tend to make bad moral choices in situations where it's a lot more tempting and a lot more easier to do so. So again, people kind of don't get the point. If you want a better world without terrorism, without drugs, you need to raise people out of poverty. You need to build an economy. You need to stabilize, right? And you need to get out of this idea that the pie is only this big. If the pie is only this big, we're all going to kill each other until we get the biggest slice. But if we can get into a mindset of expanding the pie, then things can get better. Now, folks, we're hovering between 60 and 70 people watching this. You're a great crew of folks, but I want this to be bigger. I think there's more people who want to be part of this conversation. So if you're one of the newer folks who have just joined us, tweet this out, share it, come on, make this a bigger conversation. There's a lot more we can talk about here. Now, there's a couple things people are asking me about. I see Kinky, you're asking me about Biden, right? So I'm circling that. I see somebody else is asking me about, what else are people asking me about? I've got a couple other things to talk about, but I'm going to get to Biden in a minute, Kinky. I'll get to that. But I want to talk first about Howard Schultz. Do people know who Howard Schultz? I'm going to say his name like that from now on. Howard Schultz. Howard Schultz. I'm sorry. I'm having too much fun here. Do people know Howard Schultz? Now, Howard Schultz is the former CEO of Starbucks. Right? Former CEO of Starbucks. And he's the former CEO of Starbucks. And I saw him on CNN, and he's been saying this. There's nothing new here. He's announced that he is considering running for president, but not as a Democrat. He's planning to run for president as a centrist independent. Why? because Bernie Sanders is too far left, he says. Medicare for all is not workable. We need to just stick with Obamacare, fix it up a little bit. You know, giving people free college, that's just not realistic. Bernie is too much of a socialist, too far left. God forbid we have a socialist in the White House. That's a direct quote from his CNN interview. So if the Democrats were to nominate Bernie Sanders, he's announced he's considering that he will then run in the election. And why will he run in the election? Why? He says he's going to run in the election to stop, Bernie Sanders, I guess, right? That's what he's saying. Well, lo and behold, he might as well admit, he says he hates Trump, but he also hates Sanders. Well, lo and behold, if he runs, if it becomes a three-way race, we all know who's going to win. Trump's going to be reelected. So what Howard Schultz is basically saying is that he would rather have Donald Trump reelected than have Bernie Sanders as president. And he's threatening, basically, if the Democrats nominate somebody that's too far left, that he will split the race. Right? Now, I want to talk a little bit about who Howard Schultz is. You should Google a term. If you want to know about Howard Schultz and what he's all about as the CEO of Starbucks, you should Google the term clopening. 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 That's closing and opening. And that's a nasty, nasty thing that Howard Schultz used to do to his low-wage employees, right? He's got people working at Starbucks who are getting paid 12 bucks an hour, right? Sometimes 15, sometimes maybe even 16, right? Low-wage workers, not getting paid a lot. And they work a 6-hour shift, but lo and behold, he used to make people work what he called a clopening, where they would work a 6-hour shift, an 8-hour shift, and then close the store for 4 hours. They closed the store down, and then they wouldn't get paid. They'd sit around for 4 hours, not enough time to go home, not enough time to sleep. 4 hours, do they even have time to get home at that point? Depends where they live. And then open up the store once again and work for another 6 or 8 hour shift, right? So basically, you're working a marathon that day, right? You're working 8 hours, then you have a 4-hour little break that you don't get paid for, that you don't even have time to calm down, and then you get to work for another 6 to 8 hours. This is sweatshop stuff. This is 12-hour work days, basically. De facto 12-hour work days with a 4-hour break in which you don't get paid. This is a nasty, nasty thing he was doing to his employees. The New York Times ran some articles interviewing workers. And one of the tricks of Howard Schultz's regime at Starbucks was that he would have his employees not have a consistent schedule. It wasn't like they worked the same hours every week. Oh, no. There was a computer algorithm that would determine when they work. So it was different every week. And if the computer algorithm determined that it would be good to have you as a clopening employee, you might get clopenings all the time. Right? It's a nasty, nasty trick that Howard Schultz was doing to his employees. Just a nasty thing, right? How much can he get away with it, right? Oh, darn tootin', they won't let him do 12-hour works. They won't let him run a 12-hour sweatshop. What can we do? I know. We can have them close and then open and then not pay them for the 4 hours in between. And so it's just like 2 work days right back to back. It's genius. And he says, look, I give them help to go to college. I give them assistance to go to college. I'm such a nice boss. Really, that is Howard Schultz. He is a nasty, low-wage employer. He is a modern-day sweatshop owner. And politically, he's also pretty bad, right? He's a bad guy, right? He doesn't, for example, believe in Medicare for all. He doesn't believe in health care for all. He doesn't believe in free college for people. And he's a big supporter of the American-Israeli Political Action Committee, right? He's won awards from AIPAC for being such an enthusiastic donor and supporter of Israel, right? So Howard Schultz, the low-wage employer, the the defender of Obamacare and the mess of Obamacare. Lo and behold, Howard Schultz, Howard Schultz has decided that he is so offended by Bernie Sanders, that if they nominate Bernie Sanders, he will split the race 3 ways to make sure that Trump gets reelected. He would rather have Trump than Bernie Sanders. That's Howard Schultz, right? And if you think that this is not the face of evil, that's on you. I look at Howard Schultz and I see, wow. As much as certain figures in the ruling class are afraid of Trump and they think that his populism is dangerous, they're far more afraid of Bernie Sanders. And Howard Schultz is the proof of that. And you know who's backing Howard Schultz? Who's said that he thinks what Howard Schultz is talking about doing is a good idea? Michael Bloomberg, the former mayor of New York City, Bloomberg News, right? So we've got, lo and behold, Michael Bloomberg and Howard Schultz basically threatening the Democratic Party. If you nominate somebody that we don't like, we are going to make sure Trump gets reelected by splitting the race 3 ways. So there you go. That's Howard Schultz. Now, about Joe Biden, right? Watch the clips, right? Don't take it from me. Watch the clips of Bernie Sanders. Or not, Bernie Sanders. Sorry. Watch the clips of Joe Biden, right? This is for you, Kinky. You asked about Joe Biden, right? Watch the clips of him, right? It's not just a matter of, kissing women inappropriately when it's time to hug. It's not just a matter of smelling their hair weird. It's particularly what he does with little girls, a lot of them prepubescent. I mean, watch the clips. I'm not going to describe it in great detail. I don't want to get any details wrong. I want you to see it for yourself, make your own decision. And it seems like the media is making a big deal out of stuff that he's done with adult women. But look at what he's done with prepubescent girls. In front of cameras. In public. It's all filmed, for goodness sakes, and it's gross. It's very, very, very gross. Right? And then you can talk about Hunter Biden, Joe Biden's son, who just happens to be financially invested in all of the natural gas of Ukraine after the 2014 toppling, the Euromaidan toppling of the Ukrainian elected government and the Euromaidan events, the coup of 2014. Lo and behold, you've got Hunter Biden and his son, which runs the largest non-governmental, he's hugely invested in the largest non-governmental natural gas company, Burisma Holdings, that's in Ukraine. And, Hunter Biden, heavily invested, making lots of money. You got that, right? You now got video of Joe Biden at the Council on Foreign Relations bragging that he got a prosecutor in Ukraine fired, right? This prosecutor in Ukraine, he got him fired, right? He's bragging. I said, I called him up on the phone. I said the money wasn't coming until he was fired. And doggone it, they fired him the next day. And lo and behold, this prosecutor, this general prosecutor of Ukraine, that he got fired, turns out was investigating Burisma Holdings, his son's company. We can go beyond that. Delaware. That's Joe Biden's home territory. That's what Joe Biden represented in the U.S. Senate. Delaware. I visited Wilmington, Delaware, the biggest city in the state of Delaware. I visited it at one point. Yeah. Wow. That's a city, it's like a tax haven. Right? All of these big corporations in the United States, Walmart, McDonald's, Trump, Hillary Clinton, they're all headquartered in this one building. You should go and look it up. I did a report. I went to the one building where, all these top corporations in the United States are headquartered. It's a tax haven, right? They all go to Delaware, so they don't have to pay any taxes. And I will say, Wilmington, Delaware, aside from a tiny little, downtown area that was a little nice, the people there could really use some investment. They could really use some investment in the infrastructure. The roads, wow, I saw a lot of poverty in Delaware. Right? That's Joe Biden. Right? That's Joe Biden. That's the man, the creepy man sniffing women's hair and hugging little girls and natural gas connections and all of that. And we're supposed to love him because he's Irish, right? I'm Irish. We're supposed to love him because he's a tough Irish working class guy. I called him on the phone. I'm Joe Biden. I beat people up. I want to beat Trump up. It's silly. He's playing a character. Some people think that his persona might be winning to Trump voters, right? That because he's got that tough guy persona, that people who might vote for Trump might be charmed by it, might think he's masculine enough, they might vote for him. That's Joe Biden. So there you go. You asked me about Joe Biden. he's a, you know, he's a symptom of our times, I would say. That's where we're at. I am not a fan of Joe Biden, but I'm sure there's something Joe Biden has said that I agree with somewhere, right? I mean, and he has the one-liners. He made fun of. I remember he made fun of Mayor Michael Bloomberg. He said everything the man says, every sentence the man says, contains a noun and a verb and 9/11. I thought that was pretty funny, right? And that in some ways you can find there are some aspects of him that are a little bit charming, but Joe Biden, not my biggest fan. Not a biggest fan of his. What else? What else is new? There's a couple things I wanted to talk about. I wanted to mention, I mentioned on a live here recently that I'm working on another book, right? Another book is in the works. Don't want to say too much about it. Don't want to give away the surprise. But I've got another book in the works. And I think that this book is going to be of particular interest to a lot of you. I think that the subject matter of it, the way things are going, is going to really kind of blow your mind. I think you'll like it. And I'm actually going to do it a little differently. Usually when I release a book, put it on Amazon, everyone buys it, lo and behold, it's great. I'm not thinking that's how I'm going to do it this time. I'm thinking what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a little bit of a book release event in New York City. I'm thinking that some of my friends who are musicians can come and perform. I'm thinking some of my fans and associates might want to read their favorite sections from the book, and that we might have a real, just kind of a book release event in New York City. And I'm thinking that's how I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it a little bit differently. So if you are up for it, think ahead. I'm thinking September. Don't have a date yet. Again, haven't told you all the details of the book yet, but I'm thinking about doing a formal book release event with musicians, just a nice evening, and not just me talking the whole time. Some musical acts, some jazz, some classical music, some folk bands, just a nice evening to release the new book. So keep that in your mind. No details yet. Details to come soon. But, I continue to sell copies of my previous book, Getting Rich Without Capitalism. We just had a great review of it on the Peace Report. It really hits home, and especially now that people are attacking Bernie Sanders for writing a best-selling book or whatever and getting wealthy, now people see the message of the book, that socialism is not about poverty. It's not about making people poorer in order to make it fair. Socialism is about expanding the pie. It's about unlimited growth. It's about letting society move ahead, but no one gets rich by making other people poor. But what else is on people's minds? Now, I wanted to mention, today is Palm Sunday. And the only reason I'm thinking of that, I guess you could say, one of the reasons, not the only reason, is in my neighborhood, there was some kind of Palm Sunday event on the streets of New York City that awakened me very suddenly in the morning. So I was made painfully aware that it was Palm Sunday by noise going on outside my bedroom window. But that's okay, right? People are allowed to express their religion and enjoy themselves. And New York City, it's not like Ohio where I grew up, where every house is 100 miles away. I'm just exaggerating there, of course. But, we all live in close confines. But it's Palm Sunday. Next Sunday is Easter Sunday. And I wanted to mention that because, the Easter holiday, it's the spring equinox. It's the celebration of Jesus Christ's death and resurrection according to the Christian faith. And it's close to the May Day holiday. May 1st is the communist holiday, International Workers' Day. And we know that in Europe, prior to the rise of Christianity in Europe, that the pagan Europeans used to celebrate May Day. They had the maypoles that they would dance around, and that May Day is an old European holiday. Spring is considered to be a time of rebirth, right, where society awakens and and people celebrate new things, and the Easter holiday is particularly interesting. Now, someone's pointing out that the name of the May 1st holiday was Beltane. That was the old May 1st holiday back in pre-Christian Europe. Beltane was the name of it. And then, the International Workers' Day actually comes from the United States. It comes out of the struggle for the 8-hour workday in Chicago. The Haymarket uprisings, where workers were protesting, demanding an 8-hour workday, and there was the hangings and all of that. And, and that all over the world, people celebrate May Day, May 1st, as International Workers' Day, Labor Day. It's quite exciting. And Easter is similar. It's another spring holiday celebrating the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And it's funny. I remember every year they used to show on television the Jesus Christ Superstar movie. And if you watch that, again, every work of art is tainted by the period in which it is produced. And if you watch Jesus Christ Superstar, you listen to Andrew Lloyd Webber's debut musical, that's very much a 1960s kind of thing. That's very much a 1960s generation trying to interpret the Jesus narrative, the Jesus story in their own time. That's particularly interesting. And the other thing to talk about with Easter is the Easter Uprising, right? And that was James Connolly and the Irish people fighting against the British and fighting for an independent socialist republic in Ireland. A lot of beautiful history there. The Easter Rising, right? A lot of good Irish music. Oh, Father, why are you so sad on this bright Easter morn, when Irishmen are proud and glad of the land where they were born? Oh, son, I see in memory's view a far-off distant day, when being just a lad like you, I joined the IRA. It's an interesting song there. Some of that Irish rebel music. But yeah, what's particularly interesting about the Easter Uprising is that James Connolly, people are not aware, had lived in the United States. He had immigrated to the United States, and he joined the IWW, the Wobblies. And he joined the Wobblies. He believed in socialism and anarcho-syndicalism and Marxism, but he maintained that the Irish people had the right to fight for their independence on the basis of their nation, right? He was a socialist, but he was also an Irish nationalist. And Lenin agreed with James Connolly. And Lenin also broke with classical Marxism. Marxism says there are no nations. It's workers of the world unite. Lo and behold, James Connolly said, well, no, there are nations. We, the Irish people, are oppressed by the British. We're an oppressed nation, and we're socialists. We're for the working man. But we should fight on the basis of our nation and our nationality. And that's particularly interesting. And James Connolly and Lenin, both of them, I believe they corresponded. They interacted with each other. And both of them were very pivotal figures in the history of Marxism in the 20th century. And that's very, very important. And that, that at the time, Irish people, 1916, were being drafted to go fight for the British Empire in World War I. And James Connolly and the Irish socialists, they said, no, we should fight against the British Empire, right? And they fought. They had the uprising. They seized the General Post Office. It's a very important story to know about, and that James Connolly and Lenin both had this thesis, this understanding that that people have the ability to fight for the independence of their country. And even Karl Marx's daughter, from what I understand, Karl Marx's daughter started wearing a crucifix, and it annoyed Karl Marx quite a bit because Marx was an atheist. But his daughter was wearing a crucifix, a Roman Catholic crucifix everywhere, because she was a supporter of Irish independence. And the reason the British gave for their oppression of the Irish people is the Irish are a bunch of Catholics, and Catholicism is not real Christianity. So Jenny Marx, the story goes, used to walk around the house wearing, as a teenage girl, wearing a crucifix around her neck. And Karl Marx was deeply annoyed by it, and it just drove him up the wall that his daughter was expressing religion. And she wasn't, of course, expressing religion. She was expressing support for the Irish people. Jenny Marx is an interesting person. There are some biographies of her and all of that. You all know about Karl Marx, but his daughter, Jenny Marx, was actually quite a pivotal person. And, Marxism in Marx's lifetime was not a very big movement, but about a generation afterwards, it was all over Europe, and Jenny Marx had a lot to do with it. Karl Marx's daughter, who was a bit of a rebel, from what we understand, she was known for, giving her father a hard time and embarrassing her and embarrassing him a little bit, and standing up to his authority. She was a bit of a teenage rebel. That Jenny Marx actually played a very big role in the rise of the Second International. And the rise of Marxism across Europe. Jenny Marx is kind of a pivotal figure, and that she was very much a supporter of the Irish people. And that's particularly interesting. So when I think about Easter, I'm thinking about Ireland, I'm thinking about Jenny Marx, I'm thinking about Beltane, I'm thinking about International Workers' Day, I'm thinking about May Day. A lot to think about as we face springtime here, right? And spring can also be a time, you think spring is a time of rebirth and all that, but it can also be a time of departure. It's a time when things change. Part of being reborn is breaking away from the old. It's not simply embracing the new. I know in my life there have been times where, my life circumstances have drastically changed. I've made big decisions, or people have made big decisions about me. And a lot of times that's happened in the springtime, around this time, April, May. That's a big turning point where old relationships end, new relationships begin, big changes are made. Springtime, I hate to be all astrological here, and I'm not trying to claim anything, but springtime can be very pivotal. It was weird. I remember after the Mueller report came out a couple weeks ago, it seemed like the news cycle just slowed down. Nothing was happening. I'm like, what's going on? And then all of a sudden, Assange arrest, Libya, oh my God, everything's happening. And that's the magic of spring, isn't it? Right? Spring is a time where things drastically change quite a bit. So there you go. A lot on my mind. Now, I wanted to throw this out there. I know a couple weeks back, I decided to bring someone else to this space, right? To bring someone else here in front of the bookshelf. A couple weeks back, I sat down with my friend George, and we talked about Andrew Yang, the Andrew Yang candidacy for president. He and I talked about it. The video is a huge hit. Huge hit. Thousands of views. People are watching it. People are retweeting it. I keep getting comments on it. People don't particularly like what I had to say, all the Yang fans. But whatever. And it's a popular video. So yesterday, I sat down with a longtime friend of mine, anarchist playwright Brent Langle. And we sat down here in front of the bookshelf and we chatted about anarchism, and then we ended up talking about politics and world history and peasants and economics and Jordan Peterson and the economy and unemployment and all kinds of stuff. So it's a almost 2 hours we sat here and just had a chat. And so the chat that I did with anarchist Brenton Langle, the anarchist playwright, I believe he's the only person to have ever written a play about the Appalachian Trail. He's a well-known playwright. He's produced a few plays here in New York City that people have seen and written good reviews of. Lo and behold, he and I sat down and had a nice chat. So, if you feel like watching me and Brent talking, you ought to check it out. It was a wide-ranging conversation about a lot of topics. So that was a good conversation. But I just want to say that I really do care and love you all. You're all watching this live. You're all part of this beautiful conversation. I care about you. You all have a special place in my heart, right? The world is full of insecurity. There are a lot of things that are unjust about the world, but there are people like you and I that kind of see beyond it and see something that we'd like to change, see the world as something that is not permanent, and see our role in it as making it a better place. We're not simply going to live for ourselves. We're going to try our hardest to make the world into something better, something beautiful. So if you are one of those people who watches this live, and sees injustice in the world, feels for Julian Assange, has Julian Assange on your mind, is thinking about this oil-based global order and how reactionary it is, who wants to build a better world, who wants the pie to get bigger, and who's tired of the whipsawing of the population and the inciting of people against each other, you need to stay part of this conversation. You need to keep watching these lives, keep participating in these debates, keep participating in these conversations, right? It's very important. I love you all. I hope you'll join me again. I'm glad we were able to have this chat. Stay tuned. New book in the works. All kinds of things happening. I love you all. Stay strong.